Good Monday morning and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. We are continuing testimony and presentation in the Duke 2023 IRP dockets. First, I would note that for the record that all commissioners are present here in the hearing room. We have some parties that are virtual today, and I'm going to ask that we identify the parties for the court reporter, starting with the company who's representing the company today.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Williams, Commissioners. I'm Sam Wellborn on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. With me this morning is Brett Breitschwert and Lyle Trawick.
Thank you very much. Sierra Club, I understand that your Ms. Jaffe is virtual today.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Robert Gild and Ms. Jaffe is with us virtually today.
Okay, thank you very much. CCL SACE, Ms. Mixon, you're here hiding behind the witness. And it's my understanding Ms. Clancy and Mr. Gooding are virtual today.
Yes, that's correct.
All right, thank you. Clean Energy Business Association, Carolina Clean Energy Business Association. Mr. Burns is virtual today, and Mr. Witt, you're present.
That's correct. Thank you.
All right, and ORS, looks like the same old gangs here. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair Powers.
Okay. That covers everybody, I believe. We are.
Hi there. Is Stephanie Eaton? I'm here too.
Oh, okay. Are you for Walmart?
For Walmart.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I overlooked you.
No worries.
All right. Well, okay. Here we go. We're still in the middle of the testimony of the witnesses for Duke Energy, the first panel, and well, we're still in the cross-examination or commissioner questions.
Chair Powers.
Yes.
Donna Rainey with Office of Regulatory Staff. Before we proceed in commissioner questions, I just wanted to state for the commission's benefit that we emailed commission staff on Fridays and the parties, indicating that Mr. Hayat is now available on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week and no longer requires protection from testifying on those days.
Okay.
Now available.
Okay. All right. We'll accept it as a proffer at this time.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner questions. No commissioner questions?
Chair Powers.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I'm going to ask a lot of clarifying questions, but I'm going to start with a series of questions that are primarily for Mr. Snyder and are not anything I've heard, but you all may know very well. And that it has to do with thinking ahead to how we sequence any modification ideas. So this is the 2023 comprehensive IRP. Has there been any discussion about whether there will be a 2024 update?
Yeah, I think given the change in the procedural schedule in this proceeding, where we sort of reset the clock with the supplemental filing, I think the companies are open to, the desires of this commission is when they would like to see the next update in this filing. Certainly would be willing to do a 24 update or a 25 update.
Okay. That would be your recommendation?
Yes.
As a 25 update?
Yes.
Okay. And so there would be a 25 update and then a 2026 comprehensive in your recommendation?
It says every 3 years. So, we change the clock. So okay. Is the clock reset now to 24, with 25 and 6 being updates, 27 being comprehensive. Again, I think that's maybe discussions we need to have with the ORS and of course, hearing from this commission as to what your preference is.
And have there not been discussions about that?
I don't, to my knowledge, I don't know
Okay.
that we've settled on exact dates for when those would be.
But have you settled on the idea that despite the fact that I think we're still calling this as 2023 comprehensive IRP, have you settled on the idea that the next update would be 2025?
That's my understanding, Commissioner. Yes, I would not envision us filing an update, in this calendar year.
I think it would be really helpful to either have a late filed exhibit where the parties have had that conversation and there's a unified, because the way we've done orders in the past, there's an understanding that there's an evolution and that some things need to happen right away and some things happen annually. I don't know if it has to be a late filed exhibit or just it might need to be as opposed to a letter in the record, but we can ask these questions of everybody, or the best thing would be to have an agreement.
I understand, and I think I would agree with you.
Okay. This question will be for any of you. And that is, how many models were done in 2020 in the comprehensive IRP generally?
How many
Portfolios?
portfolios?
Yes, sorry,
We had,
generally.
in the initial filing, we had 6 portfolios, range of different outcomes on that one. And then from the modified IRP, we provided another 9 portfolios. And then we had a variety of sensitivity portfolios. I don't know how many all that contains, but 6 in the original filing, and then another 9 really core portfolios in the modified.
And how does the 2024 comprehensive compare with the 2020 in terms of the number of portfolios and sensitivities?
Yeah, in this one, we originally had 33 portfolios and a number of sensitivities, mini-max analysis. In the supplemental filing, we provided 7 additional portfolios, bringing it up to 40. And then we also responded to ORS's request to expand our mini-max regret analysis. So those weren't new portfolios, but they were looking at those portfolios under a host of different input variables: commodity price, capital costs, carbon prices. We did 108 additional production cost runs. And then Mr. Quinto sponsored in his rebuttal testimony 13 additional portfolios responding to EPA's finalized rule. If you recall, we had the proposed rule was in place when we made our original filing, and we did have a portfolio that analyzed the proposed rule. The final rule changed from the proposed rule. And so to, try and give this commission visibility into the final rule, we presented 13 additional portfolios for a total of 53 portfolios with several sensitivities behind many of those portfolios.
I'll add I was part of the 2020 IRP and the modified proceeding as well. The level of sensitivity portfolios that we're providing in this one focuses on a lot of the uncertainty that we have. So what is the cost assumptions? What are the resource availability assumptions? And how do we flex those up and down to assess those risks? And what does the portfolio do to respond to those? So from a comprehensive nature, Mr. Snyder went over the number of portfolios, but I think the areas in which we addressed these uncertainties really makes this a comprehensive look at the uncertainties and really drives us again towards a P3 fall-based type of portfolio, looking at how the portfolio responds when you have these different changes.
So, just to my ears, a dramatic increase in the number of portfolios and sensitivities over the 2020 and the 2020 modified.
Yes, and we really do think, again, just the amount of uncertainty we understand. We had the higher load forecast come in. We have IRA. We have the new clean air rules. So there's just a lot happening in regulatory space. What I call carrots and sticks, right? So the IRA is a lot of carrots out there. Then you have Clean Air 111. That's your stick coming, and so we've looked at it from multiple lenses with as Mr. Quinto pointed out, sensitivities on many of those. And I think we left on Friday with a discussion about is the porridge too cold or too hot, or is it just right? I think with 53 portfolios in the record and multiple sensitivities around those, you get to pick your porridge here. We are strongly recommending P3 fall base, but there are portfolios on either side of that. It's not just P0. Mr. Quinto presented in his supplement or in his rebuttal testimony on the clean air portfolios. We have a portfolio without offshore wind, for example, that reaches a 70% reduction 3 years later than P3 fall base. We are recommending as the company that P3 fall base gives us that diversity of offshore wind, subject to, we're just going in for the ARFI and we're getting a lot of information on that. We certainly haven't made firm commitments to that, but it gives you that diversity. But there is a portfolio, if that's not the desire of South Carolina, that we pursue offshore wind at this point in time, at least as part of a recommended portfolio. There is a portfolio in the record that has no offshore wind in it, and it has compliance 3 years later. So there is a wholesome body of work in the record that we feel allows the commission the discretion to look at all the balancing factors and pick a portfolio. We believe, again, strongly that P3 fall base is that portfolio, but recognize it's this commission's choice as to what is the recommended portfolio. So I think there is the level of work and effort that went in over the last 18 months has really been extraordinary.
Is there a portfolio that is somewhere between P3 and P0?
Yes, Commissioner Williams. The one I just spoke about,
Okay.
right, is 3 years later in terms of the trajectory of reductions. It's a 2038 versus a 2035, and it excludes offshore wind at this point in time. Again, knowing that down the road things may change, but by and large, most of the, if not all of the near-term actions, other than the ARFI on the offshore wind, are well aligned with that portfolio. So the level of gas additions, solar additions, storage additions are very well aligned. But without the offshore wind and you lose that diversity, you just need more time to do more solar over time, more nuclear over time to achieve those carbon reductions. And you lose that diversification of the offshore wind. But for example, that does, and I think witness Welburn on page 13 of her surrebuttal testimony outlines some of those portfolios that were in the EPA 111 analysis that are to some extent something in between P3 fall base and P0.
Thank you. I'm stunned at how many of you were able to identify page numbers from other people's testimony in addition to your own. And while I'm commenting, I also want to thank you. It may have become standard practice to include a glossary, but that's probably the most well-worn page in your IRP for me because some of the acronyms just don't stick and I have to be reminded, so thank you.
And I think Witness Quinto pointed to Appendix N, and no one's going to go, here's how many 800 pages in or something by the time you get to Appendix N. But I would just, the only reason I highlight that for the commission is, you know, there is 8 pages in Appendix N of just glossary references to every part of the South Carolina IRP statute and how we looked at it, as well as all of the past commission orders. We took very seriously right up front from the beginning of ensuring that we comprehensively looked at this from a South Carolina lens and developed an appropriate South Carolina oriented IRP. And so, you know, Witness Shirley Smith was in with us from the very beginning and said, let's do a very methodic walk through the IRP statute and through all the commission orders. And as we begin to develop this all the way back, starting with stakeholder meeting, which, you know, her and her team attended, helped to drive assurance that this plan was developed with South Carolina in mind and was a plan that met the South Carolina IRP statute as well as all the past commission orders. And, you know, when you get 800-900 pages, sometimes it's hard to say, did you really do it? And so we endeavored to say, you know, here are all the things that we considered in Appendix N and reference where we address those throughout that document so that the commission and the ORS could have that cross-reference.
Thank you for reminding us of that. So having referenced, you know, meeting South Carolina's laws, there's been some discussion in the hearing about difference. I'd just be interested in hearing you, if you're able to talk about how you will implement this IRP if we make a decision that is, I don't want to even describe the difference between the decision that North Carolina makes, whether it's large or small, I don't know, but how do you address, how do you run a company with, you know, different orders in different states? You're used to that, but within an IRP, I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, you know, we've benefited greatly from the dual state system, as we've heard throughout last week. The scope and scale that we bring with the size of the utility allows us to spread risk and implement our resource plans in a way that's very efficient. It has led to some of the lowest rate. We have below national average rates due to some of this efficiency. So I would say, you know, we are hoping that those differences are minimal because you start to lose those efficiencies. Witness Bateman, I think has gone into some of her testimony on some of the mechanics of how, if there are discrete resources that the states differ on, that how we would use cost allocation methodologies to ring fence both the costs and the benefits of of a specific resource, say offshore wind, because it's a specific one that's been the subject of a lot of discussion. I think she can talk to you a little bit about how we might do that and say, okay, we have differences in one of these large resources, and here's a way that we could do that. I would say knowing that, the earlier we know that, the better it is for all parties involved, for customers, for this commission, for the North Carolina Commission, so that there's adequate time to ensure we're all aligned on how we're going to handle that. It would be very difficult to do that after the fact, right? So it's important for North Carolina to know as they, for example, say, do we or don't we? Because they're still, at the very early stages of this as well. And I'm sure one of the key pieces of information they're looking for is, are we doing this together and sharing benefits and risks across the broader, or are we going to do it over a smaller? And that may be one of their influencing. So having direction out of this order, I think, will feed into both commission's orders in the next filing.
This is mostly a curiosity question, but who has to make the decision first?
I think
North Carolina or South Carolina?
I think if you think about it, it's we sometimes tend to almost overuse the word check and adjust, but the decision doesn't happen in one fell swoop, right? So I think what we're gaining information through each IRP. So we will see, we don't have an order out of North Carolina. Obviously, we're still here in South Carolina. Whether moving forward with the ARFI, for example, is agreed upon by the commission. There are parties on both sides of that as well in North Carolina. But we have to move, that's a long way from there. That's sort of the first steps into pre-development work, then full development and construction. So I think it's a little bit, I almost view it as iterative, right? So
I think maybe what I'm asking is the North Carolina order due before the South Carolina order? Not that we would look at it, but it was a curiosity.
I'm looking to legal. I believe it is, but I know they're not supposed to testify for me. But Ms. Smith will definitely know the answer to that.
Okay, sounds good. Switching gears, I recall, and I wasn't able to participate in the Duke IRP in 2020, but I remember in that first IRP iterative, a lot of interest in access to your modeling resource to be able to do test runs and maybe to be able to for interveners to do their own runs. Was that true?
Yes.
And you made that accessible, right?
We were very diligent. We filed all of our files with some pretty detailed, here's what they are, here's how to use them. We had a technical stakeholder meeting and we filed that contemporaneously. Back then, it used to be, ask for it in Discovery, then we would file it in Discovery. Now we file, we actually have to put it on a pretty large, shared drive. It's a huge amount of data. We file it contemporaneously with the filing of the IRP. And then both before we file and after we file that, we have technical stakeholder meetings to help interveners work through those files.
Did you envision when you made those available or in the 2020 discussions, was the idea that there might be additional modeling that might take place? Or was it more of the check and evaluate?
We certainly saw the potential for that. I think we heard last week that ORS's consultants were able to take our data, and we responded to a lot of formal data requests as well as having open discussions with them. They were able to take and replicate our results, is what I heard them say, which I think is a positive step.
Okay. I have a lot more questions, but I really don't like asking on and on and on. So I'm going to take a break and see if somebody else wants to ask you some questions. But thank you very much.
Commissioner Caston.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Mr. Quinto, this was what I wrote late Friday afternoon, so I had to kind of remind myself this morning. In Cross by ORS, I think you made a comment along the lines that if the commission chooses or selects a generation source, and I don't remember what followed that, but do you recall that back and forth?
Yeah, I believe some of the discussion was what Mr. Schneider was getting to earlier today, that we do have some of these portfolios in the plan today, and that's from the initial filing, from the supplemental planning analysis, and then from the additional modeling that's provided in my rebuttal testimony that evaluates the uncertainty with some of these resources, specifically offshore wind. That's been the biggest one that's been of discussion. So while the companies believe that at this moment in time, with this information that's available, P3 fall base continues to be the most reasonable and prudent plan based on the assumptions that we have today. Our near-term actions will help inform us of, are those assumptions correct in terms of availability, in terms of cost, in terms of value to the system. And as we go forward into future planning cycles, we'll have more information that'll feed that process, and we can understand at that time if it does continue to be part of the most reasonable and prudent plan. However, at this point, we do continue to think P3 fall base is the right plan. But if the commission already has some thoughts on specific risks associated with resources and specifically around offshore wind, while the near-term development or the near-term actions is really a request for information to get more information on this resource, and it does allow us time to check and adjust. But if the commission doesn't believe that offshore wind is appropriate for this portfolio or the most reasonable and prudent plan, there is a plan that the companies have presented that the commission could evaluate as well as the most reasonable and prudent plan.
All right. Thank you for that. What I was trying to discern from that, I guess, question from ORS and your response was, do you believe it is the commission's role to select Duke's generation sources?
I believe it's helpful for the utilities in South Carolina. The commission has provided guidance on near-term actions that those utilities should take to pursue generation sources to meet the needs of the state. I think what the companies are looking at now is in line with what the other utilities have requested and have received, and understanding that, being on the same page with the commission allows the companies to plan that into how they go and execute this, the needs for South Carolina, the drastic amount of energy from economic development, as Mr. Stillman's pointed out, the need for reliability and pressures of relying on our neighbors, all these types of diversity of resources to help contribute to that reliability of the system. Understanding where the commission stands on that is important on how the companies proceed following this proceeding.
Would you agree that the commission should apply South Carolina law to the IRP?
Yes, absolutely.
Evaluation?
Absolutely.
And I kind of want to circle back to that question because I want to make sure I understand. And if you can, if you can do it with a yes or no, do it. If you have to add a few words, that's fine. What I'm asking you is, do you believe my role, this commission's role, is to select generation sources for Duke Energy?
I'm going to add some qualifiers to it. I believe it's the commission's role to determine the most reasonable and prudent plan, and the companies have put forward what they believe is the most reasonable and prudent plan. And that guidance allows the companies to go out and continue to pursue those resources. We will have opportunity to get more information and determine if those actions are still reasonable as we go forward. But it is a critical piece of information for the companies to understand that the plan that the commission has deemed the most reasonable and prudent is something in line with how the company should execute the generation needs of the system.
I'm still trying to discern if that was a yes or no.
Let me maybe say it a different way.
Well, can you say it in fewer
Yes.
words?
53 portfolios. I think we have to pick one that's the most reasonable and prudent, and those by definition will have a set of resources in them.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Casson, can I ask a related question?
Certainly.
So, thinking back about the number of portfolios, how many of those this time around were devised in order to look at no carbon and our carbon goals?
So there's a number, probably 3 or 4 in the initial plan that are specific, no carbon constraints. There was
No carbon constraints.
No carbon constraints.
Okay.
And then a update of that base no carbon constraints in the supplemental planning analysis where we integrated the new load forecast. I will say throughout the modeling framework that the companies have put up, they really looked at it against the balancing factors and how do we develop a range of portfolios that meet all or begin to address all of the balancing factors, from reliability to diversity of resources to least cost and foreseeable conditions, and how can we develop a range of those portfolios that meet those criterias and drive resources in different ways.
And just said really briefly, without some form of price or constraint, and just have neither, you simply don't drive to the balancing factors that the South Carolina IRP statute calls for, right? So once we started to recognize that, you limit how many permutations of a non-compliant plan you want to do, right? So without any carbon constraint, you're more than 50% of your energy comes from gas. And we just viewed that as, you know, so many of the balancing factors that doesn't align with commodity price risk exposure, diversity of resources, being mindful of, you know, foreseeable conditions as we go into the future. And so we limited the number of those when we determined that that was not in line with the South Carolina IRP statute's balancing factor. We were ordered to do it coming out of the 2020 IRP. We've continued to do it in the updates, but we did not run a significant number of portfolios for that reason.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Caston.
Certainly. I guess you first, Mr. Quinto, and if you want to respond. How has North Carolina's carbon plan changed, I guess, the company's approach to meeting their generation and capacity needs?
I think the two IRP rules, statutes in the two states drive to very similar results. A diverse set of resources, maintains reliability in a least cost manner, and look to reduce risk on a long-term basis. And the companies look at it holistically. You know, we've got a figure in Chapter 2 that kind of outlines.
I'm familiar with that.
Yes, that outlines our balancing factors, maintaining reliability and compliance with laws and regulations, and then balancing those costs, diversity of resources amongst the ways that you can execute that portfolio. So I really do think that there's a lot more in common than there's different between the two states and the IRP statutes and what they seek to do from a least cost, reliable, diverse set of resources to minimize risk for customers on a long run basis.
And just very briefly, I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding a little bit in that the outcome is of our resource plan is very consistent with our peers here in South Carolina. You know, obviously the offshore wind we just spoke about, but for, you know, the offshore wind, and new nuclear, you know, I think we have the size, scope, scale, to take on small modular perhaps in a way that others are still looking into. But by and large, when you look at the diversity mix of, you know, how much solar is being added, how much storage is being added, I just saw Santee's came out last week with their IRP, and it has a similar amount of onshore wind, a little more on a size adjusted basis, and is as aggressive, if not more, time wise. So our IRP resulted in a IRP that is very similar, but for the two that I just spoke about, to our peers that aren't in a dual state system. So to Mr. Quinto's point of these, you know, it's easy to point to them and say, look at the differences, but they're driving to effectuate the same outcomes. And that's what we're seeing completely independently for Santee and Dominion, South Carolina, is IRPs that have similar or with, you know, similar resource mixes that we have with the dual state system.
Okay, hearing that. But South Carolina law and North Carolina law are distinctly different, correct?
Yes.
And I know I've heard some comments, and I can't recall who or when, relative to the dual state approach and understand it, and you got to function under two separate commissions, two separate set of laws. And I think, and I can't remember if it was your testimony, Mr. Snyder, or somebody's where they talked about divergence or if a divergence occurred. But with HB, I think it's 951, do you think, do you consider that probably some divergence from existing South Carolina law?
Yeah, I think, you know, we spoke about with Commissioner Williams earlier, if we end up in a place where there's a hopefully very finite and discrete number of differences, we will have to accommodate that in some form or fashion. I think, you know, it's using offshore wind is probably the most likely that what I've heard from last week. We will have to do that, but I think you know, Witness Smith uses a term. You gave us some homework to do out of a prior filing that says strive very hard to accommodate differences in a way that works for both states. And I think, you know, we really strove, as you can see, you know, be remiss, I didn't say, you know, very proud of the team who put in, you know, tremendous number of late nights and weekends and gave up a lot of family vacations over the last summer here to come up with a plan that we think is squarely compliant and whether it's letter or intent of South Carolina IRP statute, but also complies with North Carolina 951. You know, we up there a month or so ago, I lose track of days these days, there were many parties arguing for P1 or P2, right? And so there are differences of opinions across the parties in these cases as to which side, where is that porridge? Everybody's definition of what's just right porridge is different in this proceeding. But I think we've got a plan that squarely meets the intent and the letter of the South Carolina IRP statute. if we do find ourselves where the two commissions have portfolios that have slight differences, we will work diligently to come up with a mechanism to proceed on that.
Thank you. And I had some other questions, but I'll ask this one question now and wait and see. Maybe they'll be answered otherwise. Mr. Quinto, I think Mr. Breitschwert asked Mr. Hyatt if planning for a dual system is more economical than individual states. And I think Mr. Hyatt seemed to agree that it could be more economical. But depending on constraints that are added, he said that may or may not be the case. Do you agree with that?
I would say a larger footprint, and the footprint, the size and scope of the combined DEC and DEP companies provides a tremendous amount of value to the Carolinas, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Every resource spread out, being able to take advantage of a joint dispatch agreement that allows for the economic flow of non-firm energy. So being able to take advantage of lower cost energy in one service territory compared to the other, operating across state lines, having diversity of resources. So a solar site in North Carolina and the solar site in South Carolina may not hit the same cloud cover. Having the geography of pump storage in South Carolina and the opportunity for relatively higher capacity factor solar and wind in the coastal parts of DEP provides tremendous benefits. I certainly agree with that. Constraints do have the opportunity to increase the cost of a system, but we have to look at it in relation to what is that constraint doing, and is it mitigating risk in another area? And in the case of the companies, we are looking at continually reducing risk to customers from a commodity price exposure to a diverse set of resources. That means we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket for a certain type of technology. And from, the pressures that we see on the fossil generation industry, while these resources can be used and run for those peak periods for an extended amount of time that some of these variable energy and energy limited resources can't do, their reliance over the course of the year for energy may reduce, but it still has that ability to provide that peak capacity. And then on the other hand, those renewables, that diverse set of resources, can help put downward pressure on the fuels that we use that go into the fuel rider. So there's a tremendous amount of benefit from the dual state system, from the way that we operate them, as evidence of the companies continuing to pursue the merger between DEC and DEP, and how that can continue to drive efficiencies across our large dual state system. And that when you consider the constraints of each of the different jurisdictions, it may be driving towards ultimately a more cost-effective system by mitigating risk.
I just say dual state's always going to be better than individual, and I don't think the constraints are going to ever override. You would always want to be in the dual state in all circumstances. So I don't agree that if there's a couple that you're going to be better off as individual states. That just would never be the case in my mind.
Do we have y'all done any studies or any tests to verify that? Because here's my question. Again, going
Commissioner
back to,
Cass,
yes.
we have another commissioner that has a prior engagement that we're going to have to break for just about an hour. Could you hold that thought?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry, but something's that we have to deal with. And we also have another meeting that has to be attended to back here. We're going to try and be back around a few minutes after 11, maybe 11:10 or so. Might want to get a snack. Maybe we can kind of work a little bit toward or through lunch time. Thank you. We're in recess.